All right, here we are. So, I will readily admit that making 5 hero guides in 5 days, although behind the scenes, I wasn't making like one a day. I grouped them together, but still, creating an entire lot of hero guides to all come out in rapid succession gave me a little bit of burnout. I want to give myself a breath. I'm also prepping for Arkham get-togethers for November, and I realized that why don't we just do a EDH deck tech? It's going to break from my normal stuff. I don't plan for Magic to be something that I talk about a lot just because I don't know if the views are there. But this is my most beloved deck. It is the deck that has gotten the most tender love and care. I've had it for 9 years now in some form or another, and it has evolved. And I realized that let's sit down, let's do the definitive 2024 Shattergang Brothers deck. As you can probably already tell from the thumbnail for this video, this is a Shattergang Brothers Eldrazi deck. It is a deck that I started playing Magic a long time ago. I kind of returned to the game with Zendikar after a brief break just because where the game was going for Lorwyn and Alara were just something that I just didn't have interest in. It was also during my college years, and so I started to think maybe I'm too cool for Magic. And then once I got out of college, or once college was waning, I don't remember precisely, I saw Zendikar and was like, this looks really cool. This looks like a return to Magic. And by the end of that year, we had met the Eldrazi. And so I spent from 2010 until 2015 trying to figure out what an Eldrazi deck would look like in Commander. Okay, so I didn't spend all that time because Commander was something that I latched onto before the products came out in 2011, but it wasn't something that I thought oh, I'm going to build Commander decks now. That's all I'm going to do. But I spent a good chunk of time, like 3 or 4 years, just trying to figure out what is a good Commander for the Eldrazi. And I eventually landed on the Shattergang Brothers. I wrote articles for close to 7 years, and this deck, the evolution of this deck, came up a lot. And the general has changed multiple times, but I've always returned back to the Shattergang Brothers. And it's funny because I would say from an outside perspective, the Shattergang Brothers are not that important besides a few important cards within the deck that they do interact with. But I thought, I'll have all these Eldrazi spawn. I can do the creature part. I will have plenty of artifacts, especially now in today's Magic, you have plenty of artifacts. But the problem is there are so many artifacts that effect is actually lessened because there's so many treasures and foods and all these other blood, all these different tokens that are artifacts. They feed into the Shattergang Brothers, but they also make it so that it's a lot easier to get around that for your opponents. And then the sacrifice outlet, I will say that is still a pretty good mode because you can get rid of enchantments. But like I said, for the most part, what you're looking at here, the Shattergang Brothers, a 4-cost black, red, green legendary goblin artificer, 2 generic and a black to sacrifice a creature, make each other player sacrifice a creature, pay 2 generic and a red, sacrifice an artifact, each other player sacrifices an artifact, pay 2 generic and a green, sacrifice an enchantment, each other player sacrifices an enchantment, and a 3/3 stat. That body, those abilities, are not important to how this deck is going to win. It's just at the end of the day, it's almost like the IKEA problem, or the IKEA philosophy. This deck was built upon the Shattergang Brothers. It will always be the Shattergang Brothers. I have tried adding a 4th color. I have tried moving to Morphin to have all the colors. And at the end of the day, that just turns into Eldrazi good stuff, and I want Jund Eldrazi, and that's just what this deck is. So, we have dedicated 5 minutes to a card that, like I said, is used. I do cast him, but he's sort of inconsequential. He is the flag to say, hey, I'm playing my Eldrazi deck. I have these Shattergang Brothers out. We've now dedicated upwards of 5 minutes to a card that is not that important, so I only hope that this video does not go on for forever, but come along with me on this journey, because this is going to be an in-depth look at my Eldrazi deck. Some of these cards I will say are in the deck are new, so they may not have as much time to them, but it's possible that we will be going in depth a minute or two on each card, which means that this could very well be a long video. But come along for me on this journey. Also, I will say there are going to be timestamps for the cards. It's going to be a lot of work for me to do, but I will get timestamps so that if you just want to hear about a certain card, you can jump to that. Starting off with the creatures, I'm going to just do all the Eldrazi up front. There are not a lot of, in fact, I think, yeah, okay. There are not a lot of non-Eldrazi creatures, but let's just talk about each Eldrazi in whatever order. I just sorted everything into card types, and that's what we're going to do. So we've got Glaring Fleshraker, who is a 3-cost Eldrazi. I'm not going to go as in-depth to break down everything as I just did with Shattergang Brothers, or we'd be here all day. You can see the card. It is an Eldrazi drone. When you cast a colorless spell, you create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn that sacrifices and makes a colorless. And whenever another colorless creature enters the battlefield under my control, I deal 1 damage to each other opponent. Or this creature deals 1 damage to each other opponent. My gut says to read the card out. Another part of my brain says you can see the card. I apologize. But this card is new as of this year. I will say an innovation that I have done to this deck, because for a while I had the Eldrazi Titans from Battle for Zendikar, Oath of the Gatewatch, and Eldritch Moon. I had those 3 versions of Emrakul, Ulamog, and Kozilek. This is a Titanless Eldrazi deck, because I realized, based on something that one of my friends said during the first version of the deck, the version in like 2015, he was impressed by the fact that this was about the actual lower, like the non-Titan Eldrazi. This is an Eldrazi deck. This cares about the Eldrazi. And I was like, I want to go fully into that, because there were so many good cards out of, Commander Masters or whatever, Modern Masters 3. It felt like a Commander deck. There were so many good Eldrazi that I was like, I think I can do this without the Titans. This is a really good card. It's deceptive. It turns all my colorless spells into bodies, which then turn into damage. And all my creatures, my colorless creatures, then turn into a body and another body and more damage. This is such a great uncommon. And it has already, in the 4 or 5 games that I've played in public with it, it's already done so much work. I was impressed with it the first time I played it. It is, for a card that does not have a mythic or rare color, fantastic. Next up, we've got Invasion Behemoth, 4-cost Eldrazi, 2/9, which is notable. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, switch the power contents of each of any number of target creatures until the end of the turn. So that's important. You don't have to switch everything. You don't have to switch anything. This can very quickly turn into a 2/9. That might be vulnerable, but the other thing is that you can take walls. You can take 0x creatures and turn them into x0 creatures, and they just die on the spot. It becomes a very interesting political tool, because I can just take your creatures that have very low power but are just sitting there with a lot of toughness to do something. Or it can do any number of things. It can make blocking very complicated. It can just get rid of creatures in a giant swath. It can just come down and be a Wrath of God that is also a creature. And once again, this came out in 2024. I'm very impressed with this card. Not as impressed as the last card, but still very impressed with this card. I think it's got its spot. I think that it will probably stay in the deck for a long time. I guess that will be another thing to kind of talk about as we're doing all this, is what new cards do I think actually have life? Because I've updated the deck about 2 or 3 months ago. I haven't gone back to really think about it, but I guess this is kind of me thinking about it. Devourer of Destiny, a 7-cost Eldrazi, 6/6. You may reveal this card at the beginning. You may reveal this card in your opening hand. If you do, at the beginning of your first upkeep, look at the top 4 cards of your library, put one of those cards back on top of your library, exile the rest. So, not optimal, but generally, if I'm looking at the top 4 cards in my deck, there's probably only one of those that's really going to be crucial. The other ones, I can leverage which ones I'm okay just exiling. And then when you cast the spell, exile target permanent that's at least 1 or more colors. So this is removal. This is a body. This does hit the 7 cost or more. At this point, we've kind of looked at smaller ones, but it is important when we try to hit. I think 6 is the number, if I'm remembering correctly, that we're looking for spells that cost 6 or more to trigger off other cards. This is one of those cards. It's removal. It finds me. If I happen to have it in my opening hand, it will give me the best card of my top 4, and I'll have to give up the rest. But either way, I'm fine with this card just being removal, and I haven't yet reached a point where I'm like, oh, I don't want this card. It That Heralds the End, my kind of card name. 2 cost Eldrazi, colorless spells, Eldrazi drone. I forgot that it's a drone. Colorless spells you cast with converted mana cost 7 or more, cost 1 less. Other colorless creatures you control get +1/+1. So this is pretty basic. It is a colorless creature lord. It makes big spells a little bit easier to cast. And I think we'll probably, I will set this off camera, but distinctly somewhere. I'm going to figure out exactly how far down I can make a colorless spell, because it gets pretty crazy pretty quick in terms of what I'm capable of doing. But this, I knew when this was previewed pretty early on when they were announcing the set, this was one of the cards they saw, and I was like, yeah, this is going to be in there just because I want bigger creatures. I want to be able to cast those bigger creatures, and just being able to bump up all my colorless creatures into, from 0/1s into 1/2s, all the way up the chain, just great. Eldrazi Linebreaker is a card that I wasn't sure I was going to like, and the more time I play with it, the more that it's deceptively powerful. It is a 3 cost Eldrazi. It does have a colorless mana symbol in it. It is devoid. It does have trample. That devoid, or the colorless mana symbol, does mean that it, for most decks, it should be treated like a 2-color card. For my deck, it's just a red card. Like, that colorless mana does not matter to me. When we get to the lands, you'll realize just how much it doesn't matter to me. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets haste and +X/+0 until the end of turn, where X is the number of Eldrazi you control, and it is a 3/3. So this just turns something into an extremely dangerous creature. If it has flying, if it has trample, I don't really know if there's any other evasion outside of flying and trample that's in the deck. I know this deck like the back of my hand. It's funny. I don't think, there's not Menace, I don't think. And certainly not Skulk. So yeah, if it has flying or trample, which is not impossible to grant, this just makes a creature that's huge. And the thing is, it also takes a creature that may not have even been in play. This costs 3. For this deck, it costs nothing. So to take a creature that costs almost nothing, and potentially another creature that might also be very small in cost because of how much cost reduction I've done, it can just take a creature and be like, okay, so both these come into play, and I give the other creature I give it haste and +9/+0, and now it's just coming at you, and do whatever you want with it, because I might not even care about the body. I just wanted something big to hit you with. Yeah, this card has impressed me. It has replaced other cards that do things similar. If I remember correctly, I think it replaced one of the Eldrazi that, Active Treason's a creature, just gains control of the creature, gives it haste and attacks, because this was just consistency. I know that I'm going to make a big Eldrazi, and one of my creatures that are already big are just going to get bigger. Old favorite, Catacomb Sifter, generic black-green Eldrazi drone, 2/3 devoid. When it comes into play, it creates an Eldrazi Scion, which is the 1/1 variant, and whenever another creature you control dies, scry 1. This, I know, my favorite card in the deck. We will get to that card. It is not even an Eldrazi, funnily enough. This might be my favorite Eldrazi in the deck. It's the combination of the art, it's the combination of the effect, just being able to make a body that you will then sacrifice at some point, and you'll get to scry, and it just helps with smoothing. I don't need a lot of it, but the ability to just sort of control my draws just a little bit has always just proven dividends. I love the gold devoid frame as well, as I'm looking at it. I miss the devoid frame. I realized Mark Rosewater over the weekend just said devoid is one of the 20 worst mechanics, and I disagree. I love it. I think the only thing about it is that for Devoid, we needed more of this. We needed more of colorless matters. And I realized that could have gotten out of control. But I think we needed more cards that care about not being a color, and Devoid would have had more of a purpose. Now, I'm not a card designer, obviously, but just having played with Devoid a lot, I understand. The entire idea of it is basically a marker to say that you are not a thing, that you on your surface look like you are a thing. That's fine. I know I'm a niche person, but I love Devoid for the fact that it makes being a color a disadvantage. And I think if we had just had more of that built in, I feel like Devoid wouldn't have felt like this weird half keyword. It would have had more of a purpose, like an instant that just makes something devoid. It just, and I realize that's overcomplicating because there are cards going back to the beginning of Magic that basically say all your permanents are colorless, but you could have just changed it to all your permanents are devoid. And I think that there's flavor to it, and I think there could have been gameplay to it. But this is, not my first Devoid card, but I think the card that was going to tentpole this the most, because I love Catacomb Sifter. I'm irrationally happy with this card. Then we have Endbringer, a 5 generic and a colorless Eldrazi 5/5. It untaps during each player's untap step, and then it has multiple effects. You can just tap it to deal damage to target creature or player. You can pay a colorless and tap it. Target creature can't attack or block this turn, and then you can do 2 colorless and tap it to draw a card. I have the most stories of this, funny enough, from Modern, where I put a Basilisk Collar onto this so that it had lifelink and death touch, and suddenly it could just kill a creature for free every turn because it's just untapped. This is also nice because when I need to, it can come into play. Maybe I give it haste and that big boost, and then I just tap it to draw a card, and then it just untaps again. And at that point, it won't be hasted, so I can't continue to use it. But I have done funny things where I do things that are just irrational with this, where it's like, well, I can just draw a card, or I can make a creature not be able to block this turn by just giving it haste, or even just when it's just a normal creature sitting on the battlefield. It still just has the ability to be like, yeah, so I'm just going to do funny things. Part of the philosophy behind this deck over time was just, I want to build a deck that's weird. Part of the advantage of this deck is that you don't know how to handle it because it's got effects that you don't normally have to process. And this is one of them where it's not that complicated, but the fact that it untaps every turn suddenly goes, oh, so if he's just top decking, he can just draw a card every turn, and by the time he gets back around to him, he might have the answer he's looking for because he's already a deck that's willing to invest a lot of mana into things, and now he just didn't draw something, so he can just draw something for every other person at the table and have a full grip by the time he comes around. He won't be top decking anymore, and that is a hidden feature of this card that I really love. Breaker of Creation, another new card in 2024. 8 cost. When this 8 cost Eldrazi, when you cast this spell, gain 1 life for each colorless permanent you control. Hexproof from each color, and Annihilator 2. I guess that is another important thing. For a long time, this deck had maybe 1 creature with Annihilator. I understand that Annihilator is not a fun mechanic. I think in multiplayer, it has a little bit more of a place because it can swing into somebody and have them make decisions, because now it's like, okay, so I'm attacking you, and you are going to have to sacrifice 2 permanents. By the time I play this 8 cost Eldrazi out, you probably already have a plan. But it's going to be hard to deal with this thing because you either need to put forth 4 damage, which isn't a big deal, or you need to have a uncolored ability to hit it because it's hexproof. Additionally, this is colorless permanent, so this is your lands too. This is the kind of card that can take you from like 1 life up to 21 real quick in this deck. Like you can just be down for the count and suddenly just, you have to cast it, but once it comes into play, you cast it and like there's not even a way to get around that. You can't counterspell it. You can counterspell all you want, but I'm still going to gain the life. And because so many things are colorless, this just turns into a life gain spell that's on a body that's going to be hard to handle, and I love it. This is the kind of card I needed. And even like, let me just see here. I think I've actually taken this out at this point. Yeah. So there was a point in time when I had the land that you can tap it for a colorless, or you can. It was from Tarkir block, the original Tarkir block, because we're about to go back to another Tarkir thing. I'm trying to remember precisely what it did, but basically, I'm not going to do a lot of putting cards up on the screen for this, just because that would turn into a lot of editing. But I'll put that card on screen here now. But basically, it gained life for each colorless creature you control, I believe. This is a better version of that. It's on a body. I'm making progress onto the game while also gaining a bunch of life. I guess the other thing is that when we get through this, the Eldrazi are probably going to take up a lot of time, and then the other cards I hopefully will not take this as long. Chittering Dispatcher, another devoid 3-cost Eldrazi drone with Myriad, and when Chittering Dispatcher leaves the battlefield, create a 0/1 Eldrazi spawn. It is a 2/3. Myriad's what's important here, because when it attacks, it will create a token that's attacking the other players that this is not attacking, so this can make 2 or 3 other copies of itself. And when those leave the battlefield, I create Eldrazi spawn. And when I create an Eldrazi spawn, then suddenly I'm dealing damage. And it gets out of control real quick. Not to mention the fact that this deck is very good at maybe not creating a board state of creatures that are scary, but very good at like getting hit by a wrath and then just expanding back out. Being like, okay, I have 0 creatures, but at the end of my turn I have 5 creatures. And they might be 0/1s, so they might be 1/1s that just sacrifice to make a colorless, but they are blockers. And that can keep me alive, because once somebody who's never seen this deck tracks what's going on, suddenly I go from not being a threat to absolutely being a threat. And cards like this and other effects that just create bodies can totally make it so that, yes, you can hit me with a big Trampler, but you're not going to be able to just attack me with a bunch of 4/4s and get me down by a bunch of damage. I'm going to be able to stop you, and I might even be scrying while I'm stopping you. And I might be dealing damage while I'm stopping you. And it just turns into this, I'm taking everybody down. I guess that's another thing, is that for EDH, I want to build decks that win in combat, not win on the stack. Obviously, part of that means that I'm trying to take everybody down, like even keel over the course of the game, so that everybody is within striking distance when I finally want to make it. Because I also don't want to set up a scenario where I take someone from 35 down to 0, and they just have to sit there and watch us play the game. I would rather get everyone down to 18 and then be like, attack you for 20, attack you for 15, attack you for 8, and the game is going to wrap itself up within the next couple, like the next 10 minutes, so that somebody's not sitting around just like looking at their hand at a card shop. And I don't even know if that pertains to this card, but that's where my head went. They have Worldbreaker. A Oath of the Gatewatch card from back in the day. Devoid. When you cast Worldbreaker, exile target artifact, enchantment, or land. That effect gets used a lot. Reach is relevant. And I can pay 2 generic and a colorless, sacrifice a land, return Worldbreaker from my graveyard to my hand. That doesn't get used that often. This is the kind of card that really sticks around for a while. But frankly, just getting rid of a problem card and having reach, this is just a great blocker. And there's not really much more to say. It hits the golden number of 7, so that the things that care about big spells, this hits that. So this will often cost me closer to 5, maybe 4, to do what I think is a pretty good effect. And we have a new card. This is one of the cards that I'm not sure will stick around forever. We've got Hergast, Erupting Nullkite, a 9-cost legendary creature Eldrazi dragon with Emerge, which is when you may cast this spell by sacrificing another creature and paying the Emerge cost reduced by that creature's mana value. Just like using this as an example, I could cast the Null Kite for red, because I would just take the 6 off. This doesn't affect the red. This just affects the 6. So I could cast him for red. Then, when you cast the spell, you may exile your hand if you do draw 3 cards. That's not always something I use, but it is something relevant. You might just have a hand that's really not doing anything. You might as well just exile it and draw 3 cards. Flying because it's a dragon, and each creature you cast has Emerge. The Emerge cost is equal to its mana cost. So, the reason why I don't know this is going to stick around is I don't mind sacrificing one creature to get out a fairly big creature that might also draw me cards. I don't know that I'm really going to be sacrificing many of my other creatures just to get out a bigger creature. The time may come, and this may prove to be something, but so far I haven't used that feature of this card. And this has really just been more of like a flyer in a deck that doesn't have a lot of flyers. So yeah, this might not stick around forever, but as of right now, it's given me good feelings. So I haven't like abruptly said, yeah, this is just coming out. We have Eldrazi Ravager, a 6-cost Eldrazi with Annihilator 1. Sacrifice 2 Eldrazi, return Eldrazi Ravager from your graveyard to your hand, and it has cycling. I just love the idea that there's an Eldrazi with cycling. This is very generic, this is very basic, but I can get it back if I wanted to, and it is just card draw. Like it represents card draw early in the game if I have it on my opening hand and I'm not going to mulligan it away. I have this and I know, okay, if I need to, if I'm just not drawing into my 3rd or 4th land, I can cycle this and just go get it, and if I need to, I can always get it back. Haven't really reached the point where I've needed to get it back. Either I play it as a 6/6 or I just cycle it away, but that extra level of utility is great. Then I have Reality Smasher, which I'm pretty sure I got this at an auction, or I got one of them at an auction and my friend got me the other one. Not sure which one this is, but Reality Smasher, a 5-cost Eldrazi with Trample and Haste. When Eldrazi Smasher becomes the target of a spell an opponent controls, counter that spell unless the controller discards a card. So it has basically ward, discard a card, and it is a 5/5. This has probably been outclassed nowadays, but this was a great card before. I still like having it around. It is nice just to have full on just deal damage, aggression. Once again, like I said, I want to win the game through the combat step, and this is the kind of card that will absolutely do that for you. Then my other card that I got, this one I might have won at the auction. I don't remember. But either way, it's been like 8 years. Thought-Knot Seer, 4-cost Eldrazi. When Thought-Knot Seer enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it and exile that card. Then, when Thought-Knot Seer leaves the battlefield, target opponent draws a card. Those do not need to be the same people. This can just mess up a hand and then be a political tool later. It is a 4/4. Once again, to some degree, this has probably been outclassed. I could probably sit there and find another card that is Eldrazi or that is colorless that would fit more into this. But this is also one that was painted. And I will say, if I stop playing Magic, there's like 2 or 3 decks that I'll just keep forever. And if I stop playing Magic, I'll just frame this deck. It'll be a very large frame, but I will frame this deck just because I love this deck so much. In whatever state it currently is when I do that. We have Matter Reshaper, a 3-cost Eldrazi. When it dies, is a 3/2. When it dies, reveal the top card of your library. You may put that card into the battlefield if it's a permanent with a converted mana cost of 3 or less. Otherwise, put that card into your hand. So this is just nice. It either puts a land or a small Eldrazi into play, or it just draws me a card. And it is a nice body. And once again, this might have been outclassed. I don't care. I love this card. I love the art. Chris Ron did a great job, and just overall, I love the Eldrazi. And this is a really nice. I think it's important to remember that for all the 6 and 7 and 10 mana cost creatures you have, you do need to have smaller creatures, or else people who know what I'm up to are going to kill me right away. Overall, I like this card. Then, I know I said Catacomb Sifter is like my second favorite card in the deck. This is my favorite Eldrazi card. I don't know that it's my favorite. I don't know that also means that it's my favorite Eldrazi in the deck. It's just my favorite Eldrazi. I love the name It That Betrays. I love that it costs 12. I love that it has Annihilator 2. It's an 11/11. And when an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent, put that card onto the battlefield under your control. This is just great for fetch lands. Although, if I've got a 12 mana card out and you're using a fetch land, something might have gone wrong. But obviously, it has Annihilator 2. Like, that's going to mean that I'm getting things back. And we are in a world, this is a card from 2010. We're in a world now with so many token artifacts that people are making treasure tokens. People are making food and blood and you know, whatever, clues and doorknobs or whatever. And so this effect is lessened, but at the same time, people sacrifice creatures all the time. You go up against a black-green deck, they're going to be sacrificing creatures, and I'm going to get some of those things back. And it's permanent. So you, like I said, you sacrifice a land, you strip mine somebody, I get that back. I get that. It's just great. And plus, not to mention, all this dust is in the deck. We'll get to it. That's the big I win card. It's the I win card in many ways, but I just love the look of this guy. I love his name, its name, whatever. I love just the art. I love this figure in the front who's just going something, and this guy's having a great time. This to me is symbolic of the Eldrazi. Like, I already have, and some of you have probably already seen them, but I already have like the Eldrazi tattoos. I think it would be a weird day, but I would consider getting It That Betrays just like on my shoulder or something. Just get a mural of that because he's just such a cool dude. Then we have Oblivion Sower, a 6 mana cost Eldrazi. When you cast Oblivion Sower, target opponent exiles the top 4 cards of their library. You may put any number of lands that player owns in exile into control under the battlefield under your control. So this might get you 1 or 2 lands off its own effect. This is more from an era where you would be exiling cards from people's graveyards. Although, to be fair, people exile graveyards with Bajuka Bog and Tormont's Crypt and everything, like all the time. So suddenly, all those lands that were kind of just like collateral damage to get out the spells that people were worried about, suddenly I get those lands. This doesn't do the same work it did before, but it is still a card that I cast and changes the game in a way that is normally positive for me. And for the most part, I'm the only person that should get a positive effect from this deck. Then we have Twins of Discord, a 7-cost Eldrazi. When you attack, choose odd or even. Creatures with mana value of that quality cannot block this turn. Each colorless creature you control has Bloodthirst 2. So Bloodthirst 2 means that when they come into play, if an opponent lost life this turn, they come into play with 2+1/+1 counters. So this is going to make blocking more difficult, and then it's going to pay off the inability to block. We are getting to near the end, so I can say confidently the odd creatures can't block or whatever. I'll put that on screen too, just because that's important. But this replaced that because this was more in line with what I wanted to do. This helps to win through combat. This is smaller. It allows me to pick out the quality that is the most advantageous for me at the time. And yeah, I like this card. It's also funny because the Titans get so much attention, and those are the value cards. And then you get away with a card like this, and this card might cost 75 cents. For as powerful as this deck is, it's greater than the sum of its parts. Surely we will get to points in time when you're like, okay, that's an expensive card. And it's an expensive card now. It wasn't as expensive at the time when I got it. But like, these are cards that are inexpensive, but when they come together, they take down decks that are really, really good. Now, at the same time, I will not pretend this is a CDH deck. This deck would probably get its body handed to it by a CDH deck because it's too slow. But it is a very powerful deck that I can pull my punches if I need to, but at the same time, I can also just be like, okay, let's go. It is on, like easy eats. Let's go at it. Mobilizer Eldrazi. This is such a fun card. 2-cost Devoid Eldrazi Drone, 2/1 with the activated ability of pay 2 generic and a colorless. Each creature with toughness greater than its power can't block this turn. This is so much fun because it makes it so that like suddenly your creatures just inexplicably can't block. It doesn't even need to be when I'm attacking. It can just be whenever anyone's attacking. And it's just great to watch everyone suddenly play this card out. I've got the mana just like sitting off to the side. And people go, oh, suddenly my 1/2 or my walls decks are great. This is great against wall deck. You go against Doran deck and they don't do themselves. This is part of that. I'm looking for weird effects. How do you manage against this card when it matters? This card totally does not matter sometimes. This just comes down. It is just a blocker. But the times when it comes down and someone has to go, well, shucks, I don't know what to do here, is just, it's just great. Got Hideous Taskmaster, a 7-cost Eldrazi, devoid. When you cast the spell, for each opponent, gain control of up to one target creature that player controls until the end of turn. Untap those creatures. They gain Trample, Haste, Annihilator 1 until the end of turn, and this has Trample, Haste, and Annihilator 1. This turns around games. I think just the Annihilator 1 and Haste is all I really need. But taking a decent-sized creature, giving it Trample, and basically removing that blocker, plus causing whoever I'm attacking, because I could take 4 creatures and then aim all of them at the same player. So it's like, not only did you lose a blocker, but you're losing a bunch of permanents. I might be getting them back with it that betrays. And yeah, this is kind of one of those unsung heroes. He also hits the magic number of 7. That's also good. I think 7 is 6 or 7 is the number. This hits that number. Distended Mindbender, which is really fun to say out loud. It's an 8-cost emerge card. It emerges for 5 generic black, and when you cast Distended Mindbender, target opponent reveals his or her hand. You choose from it a non-land card with converted mana cost 3 or less, and a card with converted mana cost 4 or greater. That player discards those cards. So this can get out of hand. The fact that it has Emerge, I think this might be the only Emerge card other than the Dragon. This is the only like OG Emerge card in the deck. But just being able to hit someone's hand and reasonably go, okay, whose hand do I think is going to be the most annoying? And suddenly going in there and being like, okay, when I cast this, so if you want to counterspell it, that's cool, but that's one less spell that I need to worry about, one less card that I need to like analyze. I'm still going to be able to look through your hand. And I guess, oh god, timing, I always get this wrong. I believe when I cast it, so that's going to happen regardless. I think at that point, I think when I cast it, I need to say which target which opponent I'm targeting. So that does mean that like the counterspell person can kind of sit there and go, okay, I'm not going to be the one targeted. I'm just going to let this happen. And just being able to strip away a utility card and a haymaker card is just great. Plus it comes on a 5/5 body. It might cost as little as like black or black. All of a sudden just stripping out someone's hand. I do wish that it exiled though. So we've got Sowing Microspawn, and it is a 4-cost devoid Eldrazi with kicker of a colorless generic. When you cast a spell, search your library for a land card and put it onto the battlefield. So just any land, that's great. And then if I kicked it, I exile target land. This is so great. So not only does this do the work of removing a problematic land that I don't want in play, but also it ramps me, and that's just great. And this is a new card, obviously, out of the Modern Masters 3, but this does work. You don't need to kick it. If you do kick it, it's all great. If you don't kick it, then you're just going and basically getting yourself, you're getting a 3/3 body, and you're getting a land, and it's any land, which is great, because then you get your Eye of Ugin, or your Eldrazi Temple, or your Ancient Tomb. Please do not ban Ancient Tomb. Please, please, please. That's the only card that's been in vogue recently that I'm a little concerned is going to get banned out of this deck. Then we've got Bismuth Mind Render, a 4-cost Eldrazi devoid menace. Okay, so I do have menace in this deck. I didn't remember. This is a new card though. When Bismuth Mind Render deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles the top card of their library until they exile a non-land card. You may cast that card by paying life equal to its mana value rather than paying its mana cost. So this is just a fun card in a format with 40 life. This is just a great card to have. It has menace, so you're going to need to double block it if you want to block it. If not, then I'm going to get to hit you, and I'm going to get one of your things, and I'm probably going to be absolutely fine paying 4 or 5 life to play your 4 or 5 cost thing. New card, I've been happy with it thus far. Conduit of Ruin. This was the card I kept thinking of. So yes, this searches for a 7 or greater thing. Okay, so this is a 6 cost Eldrazi 5/5. When you cast Conduit of Ruin, you search your library for a colorless creature with converted mana cost 7 or greater, reveal it, then shuffle your library and put that card on top of it. The first creature spell you cast each turn costs 2 generic less. So at this point, when we are looking at it in combination with it that heralds the end, this means that my colorless spells, especially 7 or greater, which this is targeting specifically, are going to cost 3 less. Even just the ability to take every one of my creature spells each turn, the first creature spell I cast each turn, and just lower it by 2 means that my 5 mana cards become 3. I might put out a free Eldrazi. Don't know what situation that occurs in, but this finds me a big creature and then makes that creature less expensive next turn. Obviously, I still have to draw into it, but with certain cards, that's fine because I might just draw into it with whatever, or I might just let it naturally happen. I don't have that anymore. I used to have a card that when an opponent played a spell, I revealed the top card of my library, and if it was a creature, I put it into play. But I think that just proved to not be powerful enough. It just didn't do enough. Yeah. Either way, this is just a fun card. It gets me the Eldrazi I need ASAP. Territory Color, a 5-cost Eldrazi with Devoid and Reach. Reach is important to remember. Landfall. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, look at the top card of your library. If it's a creature, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. Conduit of Ruin combos off that. If you don't put that card into your hand, you may put that card into your graveyard. So May is important. I don't have to put it into my graveyard, but I can. And just being able to just being able to landfall and draw cards and maybe I'm surveilling away things that I don't need. Like this has proven thus far in the games it's played. It might have only come into play once or twice since I've gotten it, but like it's a big creature, it's decently sized, and it's going to do things. It's got reach. Reach for 7 is big, and this has felt good thus far. Then we've got Titan's Vanguard, a 5-cost Devoid Eldrazi 5/5. When you cast this spell, or whenever Titan's Vanguard attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on each colorless creature you control, and it has Trample. I did not respect this card. I looked at it and I went, this might go into the deck. And then I put it in, and I was like, oh my lord, this is amazing. If this has the ability to be played, and if you happen to give it haste, or it just gets to attack, because it's beefy, it will easily sit out on the table. Once this gets to attack, and every colorless creature you control has 2 +1/+1 counters on it, plus it has Trample, you're probably golden. Yes, you're still going to lose creatures. You're going to accrue creatures over, attrition or whatever. But this just gets the ball rolling. This is one of those cards that doesn't read like a finisher, but very quickly becomes a finisher. And that is all of the Eldrazi. It only took 46 minutes to get through all the Eldrazi plus the general. From here, my hope is that it's going to become a little bit faster. I feel like at this point, I'm not going to have to explain why a card is in the deck as much. But of the 2 colored creatures, one being Oracle of Moldiah, who's been in since the beginning, you may play an additional land each turn, play with the top card of your library revealed. You may play the top card of your library if it's a land. This is just a good card. If they ever make an Eldrazi version, Lord help me, that will be the best day ever. Over time, I've gotten less and less colored creatures into the deck just because the Eldrazi start to shine more and more. But this is one of those that I just can't imagine will not be part of the deck. It just does so much good work to help with the ramp. it turns fetch lands into this great draw spell, because it's like, oh, the top card of my deck isn't a land. Well, let's go find a land, and we'll shuffle the deck up and see if we find another card. Good card. I think anybody who's played Commander for a while is going to know why Oracle of Moldiah can be very helpful. Yes, does it give away what the top card of your deck, what you're drawing into, to the rest of the table? Sure. But there is so much additional information to take in that the top card of my deck, unless it's something very presently bad for the table, is not going to be, I'm not giving away that much information. And the other non-colorless card is Temur Sabertooth. This card could very well be taken out, I think. It is a 4-cost, 2 generic, green, cat, 4/3, with the ability of generic green. You may return another creature you control to your owner's hand. If you do, Temur Sabertooth becomes indestructible until the end of turn. This is mostly used to bounce things. Nowadays, I have less creatures that just make Eldrazi spawn or Eldrazi scions, so this does go down in value. But sometimes there's just a spell that's going to take out one of my big creatures, and this can bounce it back to my hand. This almost works more like an enchantment. This getting indestructible comes up occasionally, but being able to just recover a couple of my creatures in face of a wrath or in face of direct card removal is where this really shines. And so I'm really hesitant to take it out, but I could see a world where I sit there and I go, you know what? This other card is so much better to take out, and Temur Sabertooth is just going to have to come out. I'm going to sacrifice the extra kind of recovery I have for that. All right, on to the artifacts. And this, like I said, this is hopefully going to go a little bit faster, but we've got Urza's Incubator, 3-cost artifact. When Urza's Incubator comes into play, choose creature type. Creature spells of the chosen type cost 2 less. You know, in Eldrazi, they cost 7, now cost 2 with all the bonuses we have, with all the cost reduction. Just being able, this is normally the card that comes out and really says to the table, I'm playing Eldrazi. Because I play it down and I say Eldrazi, and then the people that don't know what, like, their next neck and go, oh, what? Part of what makes this deck so much fun is that people assume that Eldrazi decks have an Eldrazi commander. Or, yeah, at this point, you have an Eldrazi commander. And this is kind of the first sign of the blood in the water. Yeah, all my Eldrazi are going to cost 2 less. If you've played against other Eldrazi decks, this is probably a card you've seen many times. If you've played enough commander, this is a card you've seen plenty of times. It's just a good card. Mystic Forge, secretly a really stellar card. I don't know the numbers. I'm not going to stop the recording just to figure that out, but I feel like this card doesn't get enough love. 4-cost artifact. You may look at the top card of your deck anytime. You may cast the top card of your library if it's an artifact or colorless non-land card, and I can tap it and pay a life to exile a top card of my library. This just allows me to have an extra card in my hand, and if it is a artifact or colorless non-land card, just play it, and it's just good for that. This is one of the few cards in the deck that makes me go, I wish I had a way to untap artifacts, because I would love to be able to just burn through more of my deck when I'm not seeing something that I need. But additionally, this helps with card smoothing. I can look at a card and say, this is not going to help me in the scenario I'm in. I'm going to take the risk that I'm not going to be able to play it going forward and just get rid of it, because I'm looking for something that's going to have impact on the board. Then I will save everyone time and just do this. So we've got the talismans. These are probably cards that a lot of people get a lot of value out of just because they're nice 2-mana rocks. I love them because they make colorless mana. And additionally, I can take a damage to make a colored thing, but overall, these just make colorless mana, and that's what's most important to me, is because I need colorless mana. And these facilitate that. Then we've got Relic of Progenitus, a way to exile all graveyards and really help that Oblivion Sower. 1-cost artifact, tap it, target player exiles a card from their library. Exiles a card from the library. Exiles a card from their graveyard, so they get to choose. And then I can pay 1 and exile Relic of Progenitus, exile all cards in all graveyards, draw a card. This is a card that I need to be a little bit more diligent about. I need to the end of turn, just tap it and make somebody exile a card from their graveyard. Because this so frequently just sits there, and then at some point I just exile all graveyards. But I could be a little bit more proactive and keeping the amount of cards in graveyards lower so that I'm not doing this in reaction to, oh, a card we need to get rid of is just went to the graveyard. I'm going to wipe all graveyards now. This could be a card that very much just hits graveyards constantly so that when that card we need to get out finally hits the graveyard, I can just tap it and force you to do that. Like it's the illusion of choice. But overall, this is also just a way to pay 2, drop it, exile all graveyards, and draw a card. It cycles itself, and that can be a mode of this card. Moonsliver Key, a new addition. Feels new. It's actually rather old. A 2-cost artifact with the effect of generic and tap and sacrifice Moonsilver Key. Search your library for an artifact card with a mana ability or a basic land card. Reveal it and put it into your hand. So we will get into the basics, obviously, at some point. I do have waste in this deck so that if I needed to, for any number of effects, but this counts, I can go get waste and have that way to have a basic with colorless mana or production. We're going to be getting Forsaken Monument probably the most often. Obviously, we can also go get the talismans we just looked at, but this is just kind of a toolbox card that goes and gets the cards that are most important to me in that moment. And let's just move right on to Forsaken Monument, one of the coolest cards to come out in the last couple of years. Forsaken Monument, a 5-cost legendary artifact. Colorless creatures you control get +2/+2. Love it. Whenever you tap a permanent for colorless mana, create an additional colorless mana. And when you cast a colorless spell, draw 2 cards. It just sits there and it's meat potatoes. It just gets you extra life. It makes my creatures really, really big. And it takes all that colorless mana I'm making and just bumps it up. This pays for itself. 5 mana. I could not spend 5 mana easier than for Forsaken Monument. It's just such a cool card, and it is. I'm okay. See, I know a lot of people wish that Wizards would give us more tools for more decks, and I'll agree that, like, if you build a werewolf deck, I have a werewolf deck. I'm expecting that I'm not going to add much to that over the next 2 or 3 years. Maybe I'll get a wolf, because my werewolf deck is more of a wolf tribal deck anyway, or wolf kindred deck anyway, typal. I'm okay with, for this deck particularly, I'm okay with the fact that I might get 1 card a year, because this deck isn't one that I want to be updating all the time. I do want to just be able to go, oh, look, they previewed a card I'd like, let me just buy it real quick. And this, maybe this has changed. I know this was kind of expensive when it first came out, enough to stand in my memory, but it was the easiest purchase of that set for me. Then we've got Liberator, Urza's Battle Thopter, a 3-cost legendary artifact creature Thopter. It has flash and flying. You may cast colorless spells and artifact spells as though they had flash. That's all I need to hear. And when you cast a spell, if the amount of mana spent to cast that spell is greater than Liberator's power, put a +1/+1 counter on Liberator. I ignore that card effect. I probably miss that trigger all the time. What's most important is this comes down and suddenly all my Eldrazi have flash, and that should scare the pants out of people. It is 1/2, so he is fragile, but he also can grow pretty quickly. I feel like I'm more likely to put +1/+1 counters on him from Titan's Vanguard than I am from his own effect, because it's just not something that I'm thinking about. But either way, this is just great. Being able to flash in Eldrazi is just great. Then we have Inspiring Statuary. This feels like a sleeper card. It is a 3-cost artifact. Non-artifact spells you cast have improvise, which means your artifacts can help to cast those spells. Each artifact you tap after you're done activating mana abilities pays for a generic mana. So that means that, let's just look at all the artifacts we have. Urza's Incubator becomes a mana rock. Mystic Forge becomes a mana rock. Relic of Progenitus becomes a mana rock. That becomes that becomes a mana rock. This becomes a mana rock. This becomes a mana rock. For all those colorless creature spells I'm casting, this isn't going to be creating a whole bunch of mana. This isn't going to be on every turn just helping me to generate 5 mana worth of improvise. But it can help in small ways enough that, like I said, I think it's a hidden gem. I think that in a deck that needs it, I think if you're playing an Eldrazi deck, a colorless Eldrazi deck, you probably are very aware of this card. But I feel like there are places where this card is very helpful. You can use your treasure tokens without needing to use them up. And yeah, just overall, I don't see a world where I'm going to get rid of this card. Last artifact is Shadow Spear. Only have a couple copies of this because this is pretty expensive, if I remember correctly. But I got it right away because I knew this is a card I'm going to want. A 1-cost legendary artifact equipment. Equipped creature has +1/+1 and has trample and lifelink. So just being able to give trample and lifelink is great, but then also the mode that I feel like you either know it or you don't. You pay generic permanents your opponents control, lose hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn. This came up recently where it's like, what are you going to do? Well, I'm just going to pay 1, and now the other person, player C, is going to be able to just get rid of your thing. And then it equips for 2. But this is so much fun. Just being able to, 1, very cheaply get trample and lifelink onto a creature, but also being able to just turn off hexproof and indestructible is appreciated. All right, let's move on to the enchantments. We made it through all the artifacts pretty quick. Greater Good. Pretty old card, pretty well established. Generic, green for an enchantment. Sacrifice a creature, draw cards equal to that. So sacrifice creature's power, then discard 3 cards. I don't even care about the 3 cards I'm discarding. This just helps me to get directly to whatever I need to get. My creatures generally have enough power that I'm drawing 4 or 5 cards. I feel like I don't need to tell you why this card is good, especially in an Eldrazi deck with huge creatures. But in a situation where I'm going to lose a big creature anyway, why wouldn't I just draw 11 cards? Sunbird's Invocation. This can be a card that takes a little bit of work to make, and it can be a little bit of physically demanding as you're sitting there doing it. But it is a enchantment for 5 generic and a red. When you cast a spell from your hand, which is important, from your hand, reveal the top X cards of your library, where X is that card's converted mana cost or mana value. You may cast a revealed card. You may cast a card revealed this way with converted mana cost X or less without paying its mana cost. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So this is basically like a controlled cascade. For the most part, I'm going to be casting spells that have a mana value of 6, 7, 8, and then I just get to look at the top cards of my deck and find the best opportunity. Sometimes you just get a mana rock. That seems fine to me. You turn an 8 mana spell into an 8 mana spell plus a mana rock. I'm fine with that. Sometimes you don't find anything. There are plenty of times where you cast a spell for 2 and you don't get to hit anything. Cool. This has always been a good card. I can't imagine taking it out. This does a lot of work in the deck. Obviously, it does fall prey to not being colorless. So, that with every enchantment in here, save 1. We're gonna. That's just gonna be. Or save 2. That's just gonna be the case. This is susceptible to things that I care about being colorless. This is colored. Got Miri's Guile, which is a card that is very old. I think it is a rare, but it's from Tempest, so it doesn't have that thing on it. It doesn't have the colored mana symbol, but it is an enchantment for green. During your upkeep, you may look at the top 3 cards of your library and put them back in any order. So sometimes this feels like it's just kind of a needless task. You're just doing something that might not matter, but on turn 1, when I get this down, and suddenly I just get to pick my draws. I get to take the best card of the 3. This does incentivize wanting to shuffle my deck at some point, but for the most part, this just means that I'm never going to have to worry about top decking. I guess at some point you get to a point where the top 3 cards of your library are not great, so you take the best of it, and then you're kind of hoping that 3rd card coming into the fold every turn is going to be relevant. But once again, that's why finding ways to shuffle your deck is not the worst thing in the world. Once you get out the Oracle of Moldiah, you're burning through the top of your deck. You're looking to set up lands, and hopefully you can set up 2 lands and just go boom, 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 boom. And once you can get any kind of draw engine, this just becomes a card that gives you so many options. It's like Sylvan Library, but doesn't cost you life. It's not as good. Don't get me wrong. I think Sylvan Library is probably a better card, but that's just not a card that I'm playing with. This is my weird effect that I wanted in the deck. Echoes of Eternity. 6 cost in the form of 3 generic colorless. It is a Kindred enchantment Eldrazi. If a triggered ability of a colorless spell you control or another colorless permanent you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. When you cast a colorless spell, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. A copy of a permanent becomes a token. I don't know if I have gotten this into play and had it stick for very long. I love the idea of this. I will readily say that it is entirely possible that this just becomes word soup and just turns all those triggers into too much. Yes, this does double activate Annihilator, and that can be a little toxic. But even just in the context of the Flesh Raker, where it's like whenever a colorless creature comes into play, I deal damage to each opponent. Now I deal 2 damage to each opponent. Oh, and by the way, I cast a colorless spell, so that means I'm getting an Eldrazi spawn. So that's more triggers. I get a copy of that colorless spell, which means that if it's in the form of a creature, I get another copy of that creature. This, don't get me wrong, this gets out of control very quickly. But I do think that it does make for a fun board state for 5 to 10 minutes. You got Ugin's Mastery, a card that I'm considering might not be long for this deck, but it's also possible that with where Magic is currently, we will be caring about manifested style cards more and more, and this will have its place. I just haven't really found anything from the last calendar year that speaks to it yet. But Ugin's Mastery, a 4-cost colorless enchantment. I do have more colorless enchantments than I thought I did. Okay. Whenever you cast a colorless creature spell, manifest the top card of your library. At this point, you're probably aware of what manifest is, but manifest means to put the top card of your library onto the battlefield face down as a 2/2 creature. Turn it face up anytime for its mana cost if it's a creature card. And then when you attack with creatures with total power 6 or greater, you may turn a face down creature you control face up. So this is a way to get manifested enchantments or manifested artifacts face up. It's not that hard to get a total attack of 6 or greater with this deck. So this can be a way to just sneak in cards and really change the board state really quickly, where it's like, oh, you thought this was the way things were, but in reality my Forsaken Monument was face down, and now all my creatures that were already attacking for 6 or more are suddenly all getting +2/+2. And that can be so great. This has its uses. I would say that it hasn't gotten a lot of use, only because there's so much else going on that sometimes this card just gets overlooked and doesn't get cast. Then we have Path of Annihilation, a 4-cost devoid enchantment for 3 generic and a green. When Path of Annihilation enters the battlefield, create 2/0/1 Eldrazi spawn. The sacrifice to make colorless mana. And Eldrazi you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color. Cool. And when you cast a creature spell with converted mana value of 7 or greater, you gain 4 life. So this is doing a lot of work for an uncommon. I care about the bodies, but I also like the fact that I can turn all my Eldrazi into mana, into Birds of Paradise. Because sometimes, yes, I need all those blockers, but sometimes I just need the ability to rebuild, and this can help to rebuild. This creates the Eldrazi spawn I need that can get me colorless mana real quick. This can gain me some life, which is always nice, and this can also just make all my creatures into all my Eldrazi into Birds of Paradise, which is fun. And the last enchantment in the deck, and my favorite card in the deck might as well be the commander, the Spreading Plague. This is a great card. I love this card. It's a little toxic. I think there are elements of it that are problematic, but we'll get into that. So it is a 5 cost, so 4 generic black enchantment. When a creature comes into play, destroy all other creatures that share a color with it. They cannot be regenerated. I think that this is a little toxic in the fact that it does create a board state that can be hard to parse. But I think that the redeeming factor of this is that it comes into play, it does not do anything right away. There is that. It is a 5 cost card that doesn't do anything right away. But what it does do is really complicate the decisions you're making, because my creatures are devoid. They don't have a color. So there are no share a color with it for my creatures. But you have your commander, who happens to represent every color in your deck. If another creature comes into play on the opponent's side, on my side, on your side, that shares a color, suddenly your commander's gone, plus any creatures that happen to share a color with it. So suddenly, if you are just creating creature tokens, like uncontrolled, like every turn you just get a red-green dragon, you need to destroy all your other red-green cards. All other red-green creatures just get destroyed and can't be regenerated. What's fair about this is that I'm setting up a scenario where creatures are going to die, but you do get to keep one creature. When a creature comes into play, you will get to keep that creature. It's just any creature that shares a color with it is going bye-bye. Additionally, your opponents can now use their creatures as removal spells for problematic creatures. But there will always be the creature you cast, you are going to get to keep that creature, at least in terms of until another creature is cast. Then the question might be up in the air. But the way to get over this is you just need to have enchantment removal, which I think you should have. You should be able to remove an enchantment. You might not be able to remove it right away, or you might choose not to remove it right away because you just want to see where this is going. But I love this. This is the kind of payoff that I feel like if we just had this during Battle for Zendikar, it was just, you have Eldrazi creatures, that you have devoid creatures, and this is the kind of payoff. Like, I care if you share a color with something. Well, if I'm colorless, I get to live outside of that border, and suddenly everything bad that's happening to creatures that have a color, Spreading Plague is the mold that I would like to have seen more devoid matters things interact with. This was a hidden gem. I don't know if nowadays this is a card that sees a lot of play, or if people even know about, but I love it. Moving on to instants and then sorceries. We're going at a pretty healthy clip now. We've got Titan's Presence, which this is a card that's come in and out of the deck. But it is a 3-cost instant. As an additional cost to cast Titan's Presence, reveal a colorless creature from your hand. Exile target creature with power less than or equal to the revealed creature's power. This is just a removal spell. It's almost thematic. It fits the weird thing of just being like, it's something you can't plan for, something you're not thinking about. Like, well, what if here's the Titan's Presence? This is just a nice removal spell. Is it overcosted for what it is? Probably. There are probably better cards, but I just love this card, and it has the colorless frame, and it cares about my colorless creatures. And you know what? Sometimes it's a dead card. Sometimes all I have is a 2/2, and this isn't going to remove the creature that I'm worried about. But the times when it does, it's like, didn't see that coming, did you? Then we have Return of the Wild Speaker, an instant for 4 generic and a green. Choose one, draw a card equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control, or each non-human creature you control gets +3/+3 till the end of turn. This answers whatever problem I have. It's an instant, which I think is the most important. If this was a sorcery, it wouldn't be in the deck. But I think that's probably true for most instants. There's probably plenty of effects that if they were a sorcery, you wouldn't want them. But just being able to draw a bunch of cards, if that's what I need, or to just make all my creatures extra big, is just great. And there's not much more to say about it. It's just a card that does what it does, and it does it well. Then we have Bedevil, which I feel like is the natural evolution of a lot of the other removal that I had in the deck. An instant for black, red, destroy target artifact, creature, or planeswalker. for the most part, I would say this destroys creatures, but the ability to destroy an artifact is something that's I don't have a lot of in this deck, and the ability to destroy Planeswalker, not necessarily relevant in Commander. Obviously, some people have commanders that are Planeswalkers, and there are Planeswalkers that sometimes are problematic. But for the most part, this is just a good... this has Seb McKenna art. I might want to change that. But overall, this is just a good card that has its uses and fits in where it fits in and does it well. Then we have Kindred Summons, which smashes face all the time. It is a instant for 5 generic green. Choose a creature type or choose an Eldrazi. Reveal cards off the top of your library until you reveal X creatures of the chosen type, where X is the number of creatures you control of that type. Put those creatures onto the battlefield, then shuffle the rest of the revealed cards into your library. Oh my gosh, this takes my field of tokens and turns them into a field of tokens and a field of giant Eldrazi, which also might make tokens. This is a finisher. This is, as an instant, it's great, but this is a finisher. This just says, even if the state the deck is currently, even if I have 4 Eldrazi in play, the 4 Eldrazi that I'm going to pull out of my deck are probably so impactful that it's just going to swing the momentum of the game. It might not win me the game, but it's definitely going to keep me from dying. It's just great. I think the evolution of this deck has taken me away from the versions of the deck where this would have given me dead Eldrazi, where it's like, oh, I guess, like, okay, I got this. Like, you hit a Reality Smasher, yeah, you're like, okay, it could have been better. But now there are so many premium Eldrazi in this deck that this just chef's kiss. Then we have Crop Rotation, Meat and Potatoes card. For green, it is an instant. And as an additional cost to play Crop Rotation is what it now says. Sacrifice a land. Search your library for a land card and put that into play. Shuffle your library afterwards. So this just is a way to turn a basic land into Eldrazi Temple, or basically any land into the deck, the card that I need. Sometimes this goes, and we'll get into the lands, but this will just go and get a land that just a dual land of some kind that maybe I don't need it right now, but will be helpful in the future. Then we have Desecrate Reality, a 7-cost instant. For each opponent, exile up to 1 target permanent that player controls with an even mana value. That can be, when you're playing for 7, that can be pretty easy to hit. And then Adamant, which is funny. If at least 3 colorless mana was spent to cast this spell, return a permanent card with an odd mana value from your graveyard to the battlefield. I won't sit here and try to figure out how many permanents in my deck that happens to be viable to. But overall, this is just a fun... once again, this was a sorcery. I'd probably be more hesitant, but just being able to hit each opponent's even mana value cards, just take it something out. Like, sometimes you look at it and you just go, okay, this doesn't do anything against player A, but player B and C, this is going to get rid of something that I care about. And then I'm going to probably be able to come up with 3 colorless mana. So this is also getting me back an odd mana value card from my graveyard, which maybe this hits it the Betray. No, this wouldn't hit it the Betray, so that's 12. Whatever. This is probably going to hit something that I care about, even if it just hits Urza's Incubator. That still is accruing me value. Fun card, weird card, love it. Last instant is Kozilek's Return, a card that was in and out of the deck for a while, but I feel like is here to stay now. It is a devoid instant for 2 and a red. Kozilek's Return deals 2 damage to each creature. When you cast an Eldrazi creature spell with converted mana cost 7 or greater, you may exile Kozilek's Return from your graveyard. If you do, Kozilek's Return deals 5 damage to each creature. This is just a great way to just Pyroclasm and then always have the threat of just wiping the board again later. Like, it's not perfect. There are creatures that this is not going to destroy, but just being able to say that I've got a Eldrazi spell and when I cast it, I can suddenly deal 5 damage to each creature is just a great way to, almost out of nowhere, just like wipe out the table for all of those little utility creatures. Utility creatures, and sometimes your 4/4 beasts. All right, moving on to sorceries. We are cooking now. I love this. So we've got Sylvan Scrying, a 2-cost sorcery for generic green. Search your library for a land card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. This is just a nice way to ramp. Nothing else to really say. We've got Selective Obliteration, 3 generic, colorless. Each player chooses a color. Then exile each permanent unless it's colorless or is only the color its controller chose. So I like this because if we're playing at a table and someone picks black and someone picks red, you only get to pick the color that you yourself saved. For me, most of the time, I'm pretty safe to say green and save my 2 green creatures, or say red, save my Sunbird's Invocation. But for the most part, I don't care. It's the decision is on you. You're playing with a bunch of multicolored creatures, or maybe it's a little soft to some people, and it's like, okay, so I got rid of all my multicolored creatures, but I have a lot of red, or I have a lot of black, or I have a lot of white creatures, and so this isn't the worst thing in the world. But this just, once again, hits you at a point where you can't plan for this. Or you shouldn't plan for it, because why would you? I love this. This feels like a card that, if you can make colorless mana, you might want to play in your monocolored deck, because it's going to mess up other people and you're going to be fine. Then we've got Ancient Stirrings. One of the few commons in this deck. Actually, that's a good question, other than basic lands. Is this the only common? Let me just check that real quick. I've never thought about this. I would say outside of lands, it's probably definitely the only common. Yeah, we'll get to it in a second when we get to the lands. Besides basic lands, which I feel like are kind of their own rarity in themselves, might be the only common card in the deck, which is wild to me. But Ancient Stirrings, a 1-cost sorcery. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a colorless card from among them and put it into your hand. Then put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So, and then it specifies what color it is, what color this is. So this could just be at first turn, get me a land, or get me a creature that I can play. But overall, like, this is just a fun card. Like I said, it does more. This is just a fun card that does so much more than its cost. This is probably a 5-cent card for all I know. But it just has the ability to, at the end of the game when I'm top decking, just being able to look for a colorless card. Just look for that Eldrazi that I need, or look for, Forsaken Monument, or what have you. Any number of cards. This can just go and grab me the best card that I need in my deck for this scenario. Patriarch's Bidding, 3 generic black. Each player chooses a creature type. Each player returns all creature cards of a type chosen this way from their graveyards to the battlefield. So this is just a way to respond to a wrath, get all my Eldrazi back. Yes, typal, kindred decks are obviously such a thing. So like, this benefits everybody else at the table to some degree. Sometimes you're not a huge types matter deck, and you just look for something that the most cards in the most creatures that you can hit, you hit. And sometimes you get lucky and someone picks a card that happens, a creature type that happens to also be in your graveyard. But overall, this is just a nice way to, within the creature type, get back my Eldrazi and recover from a wrath. All is Dust. Everybody knows it. If you know the Eldrazi, you know this card. All is Dust, 7-cost, kindred, sorcery, Eldrazi. Each player sacrifices all colored permanents they control. So this is right along there with Spreading Plague. Another reason why Devoid is just the bee's knees for me. Not much more to say. It's just a great wrath effect that, yeah, it hits my colored enchantments and stuff, but for the most part, I'm completely okay with that. And the last sorcery is Threats Undetected. 2 generic green sorcery. Search your library for up to 4 creatures with different powers and reveal them. An opponent chooses 2 of those cards. Shuffle the chosen cards into your library and put the rest into your hand. This isn't too hard to basically hit. You just go find 4 creatures that have different powers. The powers of my creatures can vary wildly, and it is worded in such a way that you can't just find 2 creatures and then they have to give you them like gifts ungiven. This is very much like, and it also shuffles back into your library. So this is a very fixed green gifts ungiven. But either way, this is just a way, so it's like, I'm going to present you with 4 cards that might all wildly vary in what they're able to do, but hopefully are in such a way that any combination is going to be something that I'm going to be able to use. This is a card that I would say is probably on the watch list for things that might not stick around too long, but at the same time, it is just a fun card that helps me to get out the creatures when I need them. Real quick, we'll talk about my 2 Planeswalkers. I do not have a whole bunch of them. We've got Ugin the Ineffable, a 6-cost legendary Eldrazi, legendary Planeswalker Ugin. Colorless spells you cast cost 2 less. That 7 mana card now costs 1 if I have all my reducers out. Might even cost free at this point, now that's how to think about it. But either way, it's just doing the Lord's work there. And then +1 is exile the top card of your library face down and look at it. Create a 2/2 colorless spirit creature token. When this token leaves the battlefield, you may put the exiled card into your hand. So this does kind of do a pseudo manifest, but in a way that turns into card draw. Then -3, destroy target permanent that's 1 or more colors. For the most part, this is a Planeswalker that's just going to reduce my cost and maybe make me some colorless creatures, and then it starts with 4 loyalty. So not the best one. I think I do have an Ugin of the Spirit Dragon somewhere in this house, and maybe one day I would upgrade into that. But this, just being able to reduce the cost of my stuff, even for a turn, so I can burst out a bunch of colorless creatures, or colorless spells in general, is kind of the purpose of this card. It's almost kind of just a way to, like I said, burst out a bunch of stuff. It's probably going to go away pretty quickly, get me an extra card, replace itself, give me a body. It does protect itself, so it's not like it's the worst. And then my other Planeswalker is Vivian Reed, 3 generic green legendary Planeswalker Vivian. Starts with 5 loyalty, and its +1 is look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may put a creature or land card from among them into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. Has a -3 of destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying, and then a -8 of you get an emblem with creatures you control get +2/+2, have vigilance, trample, and indestructible. For the most part, this is just a way to repeatedly be removal and get me a creature or land when I need it. When it comes to Planeswalkers, I mostly care about the ability you can do when it hits the table right away. I could see a world where Vivian Reed's not going to be around for too long, but she did address something that I needed, and that was I do want to just have some repeatable removal. Her top ability might as well just be an Ancient Stirrings. It does about the same thing for me, and that does have value. That does allow her to go up to 6, and if she's uncontested, take out 2 artifacts or enchantments. Planeswalkers are very fragile in this format, so I'm not going to pretend like I'm going to get multiple uses out of it, but for the most part, these both have a use that I care about if I only have them for 1 turn. All right, final stretch. Let's talk about lands. This probably will be fairly rapid fire because it's going to be good or it's not going to be good. Underdark Rift is a land, creates a colorless, and I can pay 5 and exile Underdark Rift to roll a 10-sided die, put target artifact, creature, or planeswalker into its owner's library just underneath the top X cards of their library, activated only as a sorcery. So this is just a fun way to get rid of cards and kind of like pseudo shuffle them back into the deck. With a big enough number, when you roll a d10, you're probably going to average about 5 or 6. But 5 or 6, if that person doesn't have a lot of card draw, might be the rest of the game, depending on where you're at. So this basically is a non-basic waste that can be removal. We've got Spine Rock Null, a land, comes into play tapped, Has Hideaway. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. Exile one of them face down and put the rest on the bottom of your library. And it creates red mana, and you can pay red, and you may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost if an opponent was dealt 7 or more damage this turn. This is the kind of thing where, one, I have the ability to very easily deal 7 damage if I want to, but sometimes, even though this is in play, and it's been untapped and it's just sitting there being a mountain, people won't think about the fact that, oh, I'm about to deal a total of 7 damage to somebody else. Do the work for me. Just let you deal 8 damage to player A, and I will just cast my All Is Dust. And cool. Guildless Commons. Okay, this was the other card that I was thinking might have been a common, although I was pretty certain that it wasn't. I'm just scanning here real quick. I'm very certain. Okay, so yes, Ancient Stirrings is the only common in the deck. So this might be a weird one, but I get a lot of value out of this. So it comes into play tapped, and when it enters the battlefield, you return a land you control to its owner's hand. And then it taps for colorless. So it is a Ravnica bounce land. I think it is on Ravnica, and it creates colorless mana. Card people probably don't pay much attention to, and I don't blame you. But it is an ancient tomb that doesn't deal any damage to me, and it returning a land to my hand, not that big of a deal. This is very specific to this deck. But this is not a card. I mean, it's made it through this many iterations. This is not a card where I look at it and go, well, I'm just waiting for a card to replace it with. It's like, no, for the most part, I'm fine with this. Because if it's in my opening hand, I can mulligan it away. If it ends up being in my opening hand and I keep it, my first couple turns may be a little awkward, but this creates 2 colorless mana, and I need colorless mana. I'm fine with this card. Corrupted Crossroads creates colorless mana. Pay a life, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Spend that mana to cast cards with Devoid. So once again, this is just a way to fix my mana for my Devoid spells, and also just be a colorless mana creator. Mutavault taps a land, taps to create a colorless mana, and I can pay 1 to make it a 2/2 creature with all creature types. So this is just a way to have an extra Eldrazi on board. Gets all the benefits of all those colorless matter effects, becomes a 4/4 with Forsaken Monument in play. And yeah, I mean, if you've been playing long enough and you play Kindred decks, you know about this card. Mosswort Bridge, another hideaway land. Same thing, go look at the top 4 cards of your library, put something under here, creates a green, and then for green I can play the removed thing if I control creatures with a total of 10 or greater power. Also really easy to hit. Not as easy as Spinerock Null, but pretty easy to hit for the most part. Especially in the current iteration, this can be done with 2 creatures. And suddenly, I can always threaten whatever is under there is going to get cast. For the most part, I would say with hideaway lands, I'm looking for something that is going to have value in the mid to late game. Obviously, sometimes you're stuck with like, okay, so I'm just going to get a card that happens to be good here. But for the most part, yeah, we're going wild with these hideaway lands. Sanctum of Ugin creates colorless mana. Whenever you cast a colorless spell with mana value 7 or greater, you may sacrifice Sanctum of Ugin. If you do, search your library for a colorless creature, reveal it, and put it into your hand. So this is kind of on the edge of maybe I don't need this, but is a way to go get a colorless creature. And the size of that creature is not dictated. It's just you casting a big colorless spell. But once you've reached that point, just being able to go get even a utility Eldrazi is still fun. Eldrazi Temple, and why don't we just do also Eye of Ugin, classic Eldrazi cards. You know them, you love them. I do get a use out of this. Pay 7, search your library for a colorless creature from time to time. But I'll also say that I think other people assume that I'm going to use that. So they factor, when they're looking at my mana, they're always worried about, am I going to do that? And it's not necessarily top of mind, but being able to create a colorless mana or create 2 colorless mana for Eldrazi spells or activate abilities on colorless Eldrazi, or just making my colorless Eldrazi cost 2 less to cast. These are going to be in the deck. I've had them since the beginning because, like I said, at the very beginning of this, 90 minutes ago, I was a huge Eldrazi fan during the Rise of Eldrazi Zendikar block stuff. Unclaimed territory. When it enters the battlefield, choose Eldrazi. Create a colorless mana. Add 1 mana of any color. Use this to only cast Eldrazi spells. It's pretty simple. Mikakuro, Center of the Sea. Creates a colorless mana. 2 and tap. Each player draws 2 cards. Just a way to feed my opponents so that they can be political with each other, and also just fits the need for a colorless mana source. Dust Bowl. Creates colorless mana. Pay 3, sacrifice a land. Destroy target non-basic land. Obviously, this has got the Eldrazi frame. I love it for that. Don't actually use this to be malicious very often. Sometimes you just need to get rid of a problematic land, and it does that. But for the most part, this is actually kind of a rattlesnake. It just sits there, and people worry about it doing something, when in reality, it's just going to be a colorless mana creator for me. Ancient Tomb, like I said, this is the only card in the deck that I'm worried is going to get banned. I think in the current world where we're now under WotC's control, I think this will just be, you just need to let people know that you have an Ancient Tomb in your deck. Which, if that's the warning I need to give people, that's the least of their worries. But yeah, creates 2 colorless mana, deals 2 damage to me. That is not a big deal. Great to have on turn 1, great to have on turn 17, if we ever get to turn 17. Ziatora's Proving Ground, a land that happens to have all 3 of the types that I care about: swamp, mountain, forest. And it enters the battlefield tapped, and it cycles for 3. So just being able to tutor this out if I need to. Yes, you're paying the cost of it's coming into play tapped regardless of what you do, but it does fix my mana. As we get into the last few cards of my lands, that's going to be being able to filter my mana is important. Cycling it is also cool. Then we've got the fetch lands. So come into play, pay a life, search for a forest, mountain, swamp, whatever. Pretty basic. Haven't yet decided to destroy my pocketbook and go get the Eldrazi frames of these, but they do exist. Either way, these, I don't have a lot of fetch lands in a lot of my decks, but this is a deck that I felt like needed to do that, just to like really show that it is here and it is willing to play ball. Then we've got the shock lands. You know what they do, they come into play. I would even say that if I wanted to, I could probably invest in some other things. Shocklands might not necessarily have the same pull that they used to. But either way, yeah, just come into play. You pay 2 life. They come into play untapped. And then they have the basic land types that we need, which means that I'm able to search for them. Yeah. Then we've got the 3 temples. At this point, these are like almost like just vanilla cards. They come into play tapped. You scry 1 when they come into play, and they make their dual lands. So they just make, you know, black red, black green, red green, you know, whatever you need. In a different world, I don't have these in there, but like in a different world, these could very well also be the double-faced cards from the 3rd Zendikar visit, and I think also in Kaldheim had the remainder of the cycle. But either way, I like them because I think scrying, especially early, sacrifice some progression with your mana to just scry is always good. The last 3-card cycle is the filter lands. These probably are less popular. I get the feeling like if you know them, you know them. If you don't, you don't. Having them in the Eldrazi frame was really important to me. But they create colorless mana, most important. And then you can use either, well, so like black and green or black and red or red-green to make whatever combination of those 2 colors you need. Don't use these that often for that. These can be the biggest tripping hazard because you might find yourself not with one of the colors you need to filter off the land that you need to use. But for the most part, these were just good substitutions for the pain lands from like Ice Age era, just because they create colorless mana, and that was most important to me. And we are finally at the finish line here. We've got 5 copies of Forest. We've got 2 copies of Mountain. We've got 4 copies of Swamp. And we've got 1 copy of Waste. That's for all my basic lands. And once again, Waste is there because you might get a point when you need to search for a basic land, and a lot of the lands I care about that are non-basic create colorless mana. And this is just a way to make sure that I can I can always have access to a colorless mana creating basic land. But other than that, that is, oh boy, that is, after what I knew was going to be a long video, that is the Eldrazi. Love this deck. It is, like I said, one of 2 or 3 decks that I know I will not take apart, just to not tease too much. The other ones were, I feel pretty certain that Chatterfang is a deck that I will keep together, just because it is so close to my heart as to what I wanted to build. In that case, it was taking the Prosperous Bloom deck from really, really old Standard. It was a combo deck that won the Pro Tour, turning it into a Commander deck. I've been trying to do that for like 5 or 6 years. Finally figured that out. And then my Doran deck is another deck that I feel like will always stick with me. But this is the deck that I want to be known for the most, and so that's why it's my first deck tech. And also, it's horrors. It's Eldrazi, just in time for Halloween. But let's get back to Marvel Champions content now, and I will see you all next time.